Something unusual happened long before this campaign collapsed. Every new controversy seemed like it should have ended the race, yet each one appeared to strengthen the perception among many supporters that outside forces were trying to decide the election for them. That's an uncomfortable dynamic in politics. Attempts to warn voters can sometimes be interpreted as attempts to overrule them. Once that shift happens, evidence alone may no longer settle the debate. Every new revelation risks being filtered through distrust instead of persuasion. The question isn't simply whether the allegations mattered. It's why so many voters concluded that resisting party influence mattered even more, at least for a while. And if that's true, what finally changed?
Graham Platner's embattled campaign officially collapsed this week. For months, it has weathered scandal after scandal, and he easily sailed to victory in the June primary. But just 1 month after that victory, this week, one of his former girlfriends came forward and accused him of rape. And days later, he announced he was officially suspending his campaign. And you wrote a piece entitled this, "Graham Platner is a crisis of Democrats' own making." So to start off the conversation, how so?
Graham Platner is really what happens when you have a state party and a national party that are both very unpopular, who come into a state like Maine, tell voters that what they actually want isn't what they really want, and try to push a candidate on them, Governor Janet Mills in this case, who was very unpopular with voters. And the response you see is voters expressing themselves fully and clearly, saying, Graham Platner may have baggage, but he expresses our values, he expresses policy positions we agree with, and we're not going to have people from Washington telling us who to vote for. And that's how you end up with Platner surging to victory in the primary and now ending his campaign in disgrace.
Listen carefully to what just happened. The list of controversies keeps growing, yet the political support remains remarkably resilient. That doesn't automatically explain why people supported Platner, but it does reveal something about how modern campaigns can become symbolic. For some voters, abandoning the candidate may have felt like conceding a broader political fight. When campaigns become proxies for larger battles, every criticism risks being interpreted as confirmation that the establishment is trying to intervene. Ironically, that can make supporters more determined, not less. But movements built around resistance often face one difficult question. Is there any evidence that can still change minds, or does the political identity become larger than the individual carrying it?
And to that point, I'm curious, how much baggage do you think too much baggage is, and whose fault exactly that this vetting process, fell flat, to really say the least? Because like I said at the top, this was an embattled campaign, and I'll just list some of those controversies here. So there were years worth of derogatory and problematic Reddit posts that were attributed to him that were found. He, for well over a decade, had a tattoo that resembled a Nazi emblem before getting it covered up. He said he didn't know it was a Nazi symbol. A former girlfriend refuted that claim. It was also revealed he sent sexually explicit text messages to women who weren't his wife during their marriage, and that marriage is less than 3 years old. And the New York Times reported that some of his former girlfriends came forward, and they said that he exhibited unsettling behavior during their relationships with him. But in that report, something that was revealed, or an allegation made rather, passed the threshold of unsettling, right? It talked about violence. A former girlfriend claimed he got physical with her. He grabbed her by the shoulders hard enough at times to leave marks. He pulled her out of a taxi cab by the wrist when she didn't want to leave the vehicle. And during a fight, she alleged that he twisted her arm behind her back, pushed her into a room, and held the door closed from the outside so she was trapped in there, and said she had to stay in there until she calmed down. And Platner himself admitted that, hey, I'm not the perfect boyfriend, but he strongly denied any accusation that went beyond that. But a swath of Democrats and voters were willing to overlook that. Prominent Democrats still, after all of those allegations, after all of those controversies were revealed, still stood by him. And 72% of Democratic primary voters in Maine cast a ballot in support of him in June. So where do you think that line is, would you say?
Well, to be clear, Platner's problems and failings are his own responsibility.
The interview ends somewhere very different from where it began. It starts with one candidate's downfall but ends with a question about whether American politics has changed the relationship between character and electability. The strategist argues that the old shame economy, where misconduct carried immediate political consequences, has weakened. Whether viewers agree or disagree, the claim invites a larger conversation about incentives rather than personalities. If every party eventually concludes that winning outweighs consistency, the standard voters expect from candidates may become increasingly dependent on political affiliation rather than principle. Platner's campaign may be over, but the underlying question isn't. Did this race reveal the limits of partisan loyalty, or did it simply show that those limits arrive much later than they once did?
These were things that were very out in the open even before these terrible allegations came out that caused him to drop out. But one thing I think we can't overlook is how politics has changed over the last decade, how Donald Trump and the Republican Party embracing Trump's amorality and crassness has essentially gotten rid of any idea of a shame economy in politics. And it's allowed people to say, I don't care if my candidates are bad people. They share my values politically. They're going to advance the policies I want. And so I'm going to overlook that in favor of winning. And that, as we see with Graham Platner, is a real minefield. I mean, you can say Graham Platner is not perfect, and that's absolutely true. But there are a lot of candidates who have not done many of the things Graham Platner has done. And it was sort of disappointing to see a lot of progressive Democrats overlooking this in the interest of pushing back against the establishment Democratic elite and for fear of having their candidate pushed out of this race, potentially replaced with a centrist. But it does raise a real question of where the moral line is. And for Democrats especially who oppose things that Trump stands for and Trump's moral behavior, are they able to then embrace a candidate who is equally bad?